What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Team Chat Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Jarrett Wilson, joined to my right by Rachel Mogan.
How's it going?
And joined as our special guest, Andrew Aversa. How's it going, Andrew?
Hey, very good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you here. We're going to be talking today with Andrew about his upcoming game, Tangledeep, as well as some of his musical composing that he's done in the past under the name Zircon. So we'll be getting to that in a minute. But before we do, in case you did not know, Team Chat Podcast is a video game podcast where we talk about games, the ones we love, the ones we hate, and everything in between. If you get in contact with us, you can do that by sending us an email at teamchatpodcast@gmail.com, following us on Twitter, liking us on Facebook, and subscribing to our YouTube and iTunes channels. If you want to support the show, you can do that too by going to patreon.com/teamchatpodcast, where it's for as little as $1 a month. You can support the show, and in return, we'll give you a cool perk like getting the episode early before its general Tuesday release. And now we did have a winner of the song contest this week. Zach gave us the hint last week of Be Quiet and Listen. And Andrew Mogan, Bro Mogan, correctly guessed the song as from Metal Gear Solid 5.
We're always in collusion, me and that one.
It seems to be.
We're just always cheating.
Yeah, it's either Andrew Mogan or Brandon Weaver getting those right answers all the time. So stick around to the end of this episode where I'll be giving a hint for the song contest for this week. All right, Andrew. So it's really great to have you on the show with us today because you are currently in development of your first video game, correct? Tangledeep?
That's right.
Yep. Awesome. So I guess first, before we really get into it, just tell us about your background. Why'd you get into developing a game? Why'd you get into or composing video game music? And just kind of your interest in where your interest in gaming came from in the first place.
Like many people, I really enjoyed the days of the NES and the Super Nintendo quite fondly growing up. We'd see friends of mine on the playgrounds, talking about, oh, you played a Super Mario RPG or Chrono Trigger or Final Fantasy 3. Of course, at the time, we thought there were only, it's like 1, 2, 3, and that was it, instead of 6. But so pretty much one of my earliest memories was actually watching a friend's older brother playing Chrono Trigger. So I'm 30, so the NES for me was it was definitely more the Super Nintendo first. That was like the thing when I was that's the thing we were all talking about sort of growing up. And I was always interested in the fantasy and science fiction books and that type of thing. So I was very drawn to the kind of games that were coming out on the Super Nintendo and also PC. And so I became a gamer, and I've been a gamer ever since those days. Definitely, the 16-bit era is very nostalgic for me, but I've definitely been playing ever since. PC stuff as well, the Diablo series, Elder Scrolls, Fallout, all that good stuff.
Nice.
Sort of not as much in the sort of the PS3 360 era. That was around when I was in college, like less free time there. But at the same time, I always had a really strong connection to the music of a lot of these games. And another distinct memory from childhood was I rented Final Fantasy Mystic Quest from the video store. And that game gets a lot of hate. And honestly, looking, if you play it now, it really does not hold up. I don't know if it held up back then. Because people say it's really simple and it's too easy. But I was like 8. So I was like, this is great. This is perfect. The difficulty level is just right. But the music is it just kicks ass. The music is so good for that game. And I remember being so excited at like the battle themes and the boss themes that I was just kind of like humming them afterwards and trying to play them on the piano. Because at the time I'd started taking piano lessons. Again, my parents had me try different things, play soccer, play basketball, piano lessons and all that. So piano stuck. And so again, just some of my earliest memories of stuff that I really enjoyed listening to is video game music. And the same went for games like Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy and all that. So, about 7 or 8 years later, I'm going into high school, still kind of keeping up with the piano, still playing games. A friend of mine brought over a music making program for the computer, and he's like, hey, you want to try making some stuff, put some beats together or remix some tracks. And I really fell in love with that. And the first thing I wanted to do was like remix video game music because I had that connection to it. And so that was pretty much the start of the music thing for me. So went from the gaming and playing music unrelated to gaming to doing the game remixes. And that's when Zircon, when I started that being Zircon the artist. And so it's kind of ever since then, I've been releasing music inspired by games, remixes, and game soundtracks, sort of building up from as a hobbyist all the way up to a professional. And then just in the last, I guess at this point, it's been a little over a year, that's when I really became interested in making a game. And that's where we are today with Tangledeep.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome. So for the viewers who don't know what your project is, would you mind just giving everyone a brief synopsis of what Tangledeep actually is in terms of a gameplay experience?
Yeah, the elevator pitch that I've come up with is, imagine if Squaresoft, back in the Super Nintendo days, made a dungeon crawler. And that's basically what I'm going for with that. So the sort of the beautiful 16-bit pixel aesthetic of games like, Final Fantasy, Chrono Trigger, Secret of Mana, mixed with the randomly generated stuff from a lot of dungeon crawlers, whether you know that from like the Mystery Dungeon series or the Diablo series or kind of more hardcore roguelike games on PC, like the ASCII text stuff, takes those elements too and combines them. So it's supposed to be more accessible maybe than your average roguelike game on PC that can be very difficult, very hard to get into because of the graphics. So we really want to make the game very accessible and have these familiar elements like a job system. It's the kind of stuff that you saw back in the day, and they still do that to some degree. And lots of cool characters. There's no like elves and dwarves and stuff. It's all sort of new things. And so that's the quick summary of it.
Yeah, I can definitely see at least some of the inspiration, especially in terms of Chrono Trigger and Secret of Mana. I, of course, as one of the backers, got one of the beta keys to play it on Steam for the beta. And when I immediately booted it up, I was like, oh, this reminds me of Golden Sun. This reminds me of the 16-bit era. It brought up early Final Fantasy, Chrono Trigger exactly, especially in terms of the sound. Jared and I are both huge fans of video game soundtracks. It's one of the things that everyone on the podcast really has in common. We get really excited about it.
We've done like 3 episodes so far that are purely based just on video game soundtracks. So I mean, this is a pretty big deal for us to have a composer on. So yeah, we're excited about that.
It's interesting though that you bring up the accessibility of it, because I feel like with a lot of other modern games, especially from the PS3 and PS4 era, I don't necessarily want to say that they've been dumbed down per se, but when I started the beta for Tangledeep, I was like, oh man, I have to read so much. I
liked that though.
I know, yeah, I got really into it, but I felt like we had been really spoiled and like, oh no, you can just boot up the game and immediately start playing. And I was like, oh no, I have to think about how I'm actually going to play it and pick my character very intentionally. So it was definitely a callback to how I would have grown up playing games versus now being just able to very sort of jump right into things without having to actually learn how to play correctly or even with any amount of skill. So it was really interesting.
Yeah, same. Same
that's
for me.
Something that I think you're right. Like a lot of modern games have. Well, it's interesting because sometimes there are definitely some games, especially with Steam and the proliferation of like the very niche games. Like if you want to play a ridiculously accurate farming simulator, like you can do that with the deep stats on like everything on the farm. You can do that. And or like a train simulator or whatever. But I agree that there are a lot of games where people have this expectation like, oh, my health doesn't regenerate, like I can't just stand around and have regenerating health. But I think that there's a lot of beauty to the old mechanics. Like you can make something that's simple but not easy. Something that's maybe easy, simple to learn, but still have depth to it. It's possible to put depth in for the sake of depth. Like you can have a million skill trees and different things to put stats into every level and systems and subsystems. With Tangledeep, I want to try to focus it a little bit on the character jobs. And just like in games like Final Fantasy V and Tactics, sort of the fun of it is, what job do I want for my character or characters in those games? And how can I combine them in sort of fun ways? So each job, should be you should be able to understand what it does, and the fun comes in how you sort of combine the things. So going for that accessibility, we want it to be like pretty simple that you can at least understand it relatively quickly. But then once you start realizing, oh man, there's like at this point there's 9 jobs. There's going to be 12. Like all the combinations that I could have. Like, okay, that's where I want the real sort of the spark to go off. Like, oh man, what if I combine like this and this? That could be fun.
Oh, that would be really fun.
That would be awesome.
So which class did you start with when you played the beta?
I believe the hunter, the bow and arrow.
Oh, okay, good choice. I started with the Hussein. I'm actually not sure how to pronounce it, but I was like, she looks cool. That's the one I want to be. And it was hard. I was like,
it's hard. It's a little hard.
I also played the version that's the standard one where you have permadeath. Did not really take that whole system fully into account, was not banking my items, was not going back to town. I was like, I'll be fine. So I just kept going. And then I got killed and it was permadeath. And I was like, oh man, this is really hard.
Gotta be smart.
I know, it was quite a wake-up call.
And just in the bit that I played of it as well, like I really enjoyed the when I originally saw that it was a turn, when it said in the description that it was a turn-based game, I was thinking, oh, okay, so it's like, I'll do all my moves and then the enemies will do all their moves. But it was really interesting how you took it, where it's the enemy only moves when you move, or various things like that. So like it threw in this whole different dynamic to it that I thought it was a different way of approaching it that I hadn't necessarily run into. I haven't played as many dungeon crawlers. Like the majority of my experience with dungeon crawlers has come from the Diablo series, which is everything's happening all at the same time and it gets crazy and hectic. But this one, I'm a huge fan though of turn-based strategy games like Civilization, things like that. So it was a fun incorporation of the two styles into one, and I really enjoyed it. And I really enjoyed too the being able, especially since I was a ranged hero, that I was able to shoot at somebody a couple times with an arrow, damage them, and then switch over to my sword and then cut them down really quick when they got close into range. So I just liked the flexibility that I had in my character as well. So it was really, really well done in that regard, I thought.
All I know is I had my hotkey number 2 set to the lightning move, and I was like, that's all I'm going to do the whole game. It saved me right up until I ran out of my recharge. That was unfortunate.
Yeah.
So one of the things that is really impressive to both of us, especially with this game being made almost primarily by you alone, you're helped by a few artists. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's 3 freelance artists. One guy is doing all of the environmental art, basically the towns, the tiles for the dungeon, and the user interface. And then there's the second person does all the characters, the battle effects, like the sword slashes and fire bursts. And then the third person does all the items. So it's split between those 3.
Gotcha. So who or where would you really say so much of the diversity and detail in the items and characters comes from? Is that a collaborative process between everyone involved? Or do you more or less say this is what we're going for, and then it's kind of a built-out process from there? How would you say you go about approaching that level of depth?
It's a good question. I think... I'm in a way, I'm the art director for the game. I'm not an artist. I want to be very clear. I'm not an artist. Like, I can't do any pixel art at all. In fact, in the Discord chat for the game, we have a couple emotes that you can do, and one of them is like a pixel art face I drew, and it's just like laughably bad. We just threw that in there for fun, so people can just use that anytime. So I in a way, like, I try to direct the sort of the theme and the reference for certain pieces of art. So if I might say, like, for the characters, I'll say, for the gambler character, I wanted that to look sort of like a turn of the century, like old timey gambler, but also with these like elements of stuff like Setzer from Final Fantasy VI, and the color scheme and the general, like, what might they be wearing? What might they be holding? I said, they should be holding a deck of cards, maybe, and like fanning it out. So I'd say that, but then the character artist would take that and then he'd synthesize those things and create something. Oftentimes it's like way better than what I had in mind, but he'd use those core elements. So it's definitely collaborative. And I think like 99% of the art that I get from these guys, and they're all just incredibly talented, I'm just like, it's perfect. This is great. And then once in a while, I have something where, I'll come back and say, well, maybe we could tweak this a little bit. But for the most part, their artistic vision is like, they get it. They get what I'm trying to do, and they just make it even better.
Nice.
And would you say that the artistic styling of any individual character or even any of their moves is either altered or influenced by then the animation of those moves? Because everything kind of has its own animations to go with it. Do you ever find that there are limitations on what you can achieve graphically because you're either limited or directed more by movement?
Yeah, that's the real tricky part with pixel art, and there's a reason why a lot of games move past pixel art, not just because of the technology, but because it's so time consuming. Like if you have a 3D model, you can just turn the model around, and that's it. With pixel art, in order to do, for example, one thing that people request is they say, "Oh, can you make like the different weapons appear on the character?" But you have to draw every single weapon on the character from every direction, every frame of that. And so there's some concessions that had to be made. Like we want the game to feel fluid in terms of the animations and really to have good, we don't want it to feel laggy. It has to feel responsive. So when you move, the animation should be fast. When you attack, it should be a short animation that flows nicely into the enemy's hit animation. So that it was essential because you should be able to kind of play as slow or as fast as you want. I think having really long animation times, that's like a pet peeve of mine. It's funny, you mentioned Golden Sun. I think that's a great game, but I remember when I first played them, I was like, oh man, it's like some of the things just take too long in that game.
Like the summoning animations. That was my favorite part of the game.
Look great.
I would intentionally let every summoning animation play out every single time. It was one of my favorite things about that game, but I can understand how for many other players, that's not what they're there for, and it's just cutting into their gameplay time. For me, it was a huge plus. For everyone else, maybe not so much.
Yeah, it's definitely the preferences. I think at some point we might even do like an animation scaling slider or something, so people want like, come on, like fast, get to the next action, speed runs, they can do that. But yeah, basically the way we approach the animations is, how can we get something that feels as fluid as possible and that reacts fluidly in the sort of the budget and the time that we have. So one of the concessions is that we can only do one sort of look for the characters for now. So in this case, it's a woman with red hair, and that's like the look. We might have some kind of palette shifting maybe because that's a little bit easier, but people are saying, oh, well, can we have like different heights, can we have like a male character? Can we do different hairstyles? And it's just like, oh, well, no, we can't really do that right now. A lot of other roguelikes have very simple graphics. In a way, it's sort of like the hallmark is the ASCII, like just the @ sign, and that's your character. And even the graphical ones, a lot of them just don't have any animation at all, or they have like very, very simple animation. Or they go the route of one character, one look, but a lot of animations for that one look. So like every weapon, every spell has its own thing. And that's fine too, but I guess one of my favorite parts of games like Final Fantasy V and Tactics, even some later ones like Final Fantasy X too, which is, I know that one's a little divisive among the Final Fantasy
You
community,
could argue the best of the Final Fantasy series. I'm just kidding. No one's going to argue that point. Not any person will argue that.
But it's like, one of the cool parts is you get into a new job or new class or whatever, and you get this, like, it's a totally different look, and I think that's cool. So I thought I'd rather have more jobs, more classes, and that lets us do cool outfits and poses, rather than do like one character but a million animations for that one character. I don't know. So that was a choice that we went with. Not everybody likes it, but it's just, when you have one person doing all the animations, it's just not possible to do everything.
Yeah, don't want to stretch yourself too thin, for sure.
Exactly. So when you started this whole project, of course, it was primarily funded on Kickstarter, I believe. So as one of the earlier backers, I also got the notification when you exceeded your goal. So would you say that your personal goals for the game also scaled up when you realized you had exceeded your funding limit? Or would you say that you tended to stick a little bit more with the original plan, simply by adding more to it in terms of detailing and amount of time put into certain aspects?
I think we've all seen Kickstarters that kind of like bit off more than they could chew.
Yeah.
And it's just as of a few days ago, and probably about a week ago by the time this comes out, there was a big story about Unsung Hero. I forget the exact unsung story. But that game, I think it raised like $660,000, and
wow,
yeah,
it was supposed to be a successor to Final Fantasy Tactics, and they had some of the same people involved. And essentially, after years of nothing happening, they handed it off to a new team. The new team said, "We're going to do the best we can, but we have to start from scratch."
Wow!
And so I've seen enough of that kind of thing, and I've done some other Kickstarters that are not involved with games, but music. And I've seen that, I mean, you really need to have your scope in check. And I absolutely did not want to make the mistake of promising too much, having physical rewards take over, expanding the scope. So I really, even when it went over the goal, I was thinking, okay, what can we do that doesn't require more time from me? Because I'm doing all the code. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the code is what needs to be done to ship the game. You can have all the art in the world, but if you don't have the code, it doesn't matter. So,
right.
The stuff that we did, like more animations, more writing for the game, remix soundtrack, those are all things that could be done in parallel. And that's where I wanted it to be.
Okay, awesome. So in terms of the actual development of the game, I don't think that you came into this with perhaps a lot of experience with coding. So where did all of that knowledge come from? I mean, do you have someone helping you with it, or are you just learning as you go?
I'd say that, I came into it with the equivalent of if you just took a course in like computer science, like a one-term college course maybe. So I kind of knew the basics of, if, then, else kind of code, and like a loop and a variable, sort of the really basic stuff. Like you read the first chapter of a book. So I wasn't coming at it like, what's programming? But you're right, there's an enormous amount to learn. I selected Unity to use as the basis for the game, so it's not totally from scratch, but there's still a ton of stuff to do, like, okay, well, how do you do a map on the screen? How do you get a character on the screen? How do you animate it? So one of my big mentors on this project his name is Jim Shepard, and he's another game developer who previously worked on some really big stuff like Quake 4 and Doom 3, Borderlands. Wow. And then he kind of transitioned from the AAA stuff into doing indie games. And he made a roguelike, much like the one I'm making, but definitely a very different tone, very different graphical style, called Dungeon Mans. And I did the music for that game. That's how I met him. And we became good friends, just hit it off, like a lot of the same interests and everything. So when I said to him, I really want to learn how to do this, I flew out to Seattle where he lives. We were hanging out, and he basically gave me this sort of boot camp on, okay, let's get a character on the screen, let's animate it, like let's figure that out.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Sort of the follow-up questions that I had about the process, he's always been there as a mentor, and over time I've needed less and less help, obviously, as I grasped more and more the basics. But he's been immensely helpful. But other than that, I mean, there's so many things that come up when you're making a game. Everything from how do I render the map properly so it's like pixel perfect, so the pixels don't stretch and has the right aspect ratio. How do I make the game so that it can be localized? So a lot of that stuff, it's trial and error. It's like reading forums, and I attribute my hard-headedness. Like I get to a problem, I just don't give up. I just hit my head against it until I get past it. That's what's enabled me to move through all my inexperience, ultimately.
Yeah, that's obviously, I mean, I can't even begin to imagine making my own game. So clearly you do have to have a lot of motivation and a lot of drive and a lot of stubbornness to not just give up and leave it by the wayside. So what would you say for you personally is the biggest challenge you've run into with the development of the game?
Boy, it's probably the user interface stuff. That's probably the hardest thing, and not just UI but control. It's very easy to make I shouldn't say very easy, let me rephrase that. It is easier to make a game where you know exactly the screen that people are going to be playing on, the computer they're going to be playing it on. So I can imagine if you're developing for a specific console, and you could say, yes, it's a Switch, I know the aspect ratio, I know the hardware, and that's it. But so many of the things I've had to deal with are related to, people report a bug and I can't figure out what's causing it. And they're like, oh, well, I used the controller for that. Oh, I was just using the mouse. I was just using the keyboard. And, going back to the accessibility of it, I want the game to be totally playable with just keyboard. You never have to touch the mouse. Or just mouse, you never have to touch the keyboard, or just controller, or a combination of all three, and they all have to work seamlessly. So if you go from keyboard and then you plug in a controller while the game's running and navigate the same menu you were just on, that stuff is incredibly challenging to do, and it's so time consuming. My code for the UI alone is like 3 times the size, I think, of the code that like procedurally generates all the maps and everything.
Wow.
It's just crazy.
Wow, that's crazy.
So that's definitely the hardest part.
Yeah, that sounds borderline impossible for someone that doesn't really have any hands-on experience with that. So you
a lot of banging my head against the wall, that's for sure.
So you mentioned a little bit that you sometimes go to online forums. So do you have like a community that you're able to tap into, or like a network of resources that you can go to get help when you encounter problems that you might not be able to fix on your own?
It's a little hit or miss, because sometimes you run into a problem that other people have run into, like, with pixel-based games in Unity. One of the big things, and you actually see this in a lot of like the retro hardware, like you've ever seen the things like the Retron 5 or the NES Classic, anything that's sort of emulating the look of an old game. There's this question of, if you have an HD display and you have a certain number of pixels, how do you know? Do you stretch the pixels? Do you like have bars on the side of the screen? Like, what do you do? That question has been asked and answered many times. So I've been able to refer to discussions on the Unity forums, for example, and that's fine. Other questions are a little bit more obscure, or they're related to these very, very specific things, like how do you procedurally generate a dungeon and have it make sense, have it be interesting. In those questions, there's a couple Discord servers. One of them is called Game Dev League, and there's chats there for like Unity and art and procedural generation. And then there's another one that's just for roguelikes, called, I think, just roguelikes, that is from the Reddit community for people that enjoy roguelikes. And so that's the place where, if you want to know, how do I create a cool dungeon? How do I create a cave? What are some resources? And there's tons of people that are willing to just geek out about that all day. Because a lot of people developing dungeon crawlers, a lot of people just do it for fun. They just release them for free, and they're happy to talk about it. They're happy to share their experiences.
Yeah, that's really amazing. So in terms of the rest of your small team, where did you find the artists that you work with on your project? Did you already know them, or did you just reach out to the community and say, hey, I need a couple of artists for this project. Want to join up?
The guy that Andrew Lewers, or OA, he's the guy that does the environment and the UI art. And the environment art, in a way, is one of the most important things, because as soon as you load the game, I think the town that you start out in is just gorgeous, and it's like 1,000 by 1,000 pixels, hand drawn, and it just looks so good.
Yeah.
I think when you play a game like Secret of Mana and you're just struck by how lovely the trees and the water look, I mean, there's something to be said, like good pixel art is timeless. So he is a friend of mine. And even before this project, we were good friends from the video game remixing community, Overclock Remix. And it just turns out that he's like a badass artist also, in addition to being an awesome musician. So I kind of said, hey, would you be interested in working on this? I don't know where it's going to go. I'm going to work hard on it. I guarantee that I'm going to keep working on it. Do you want to have a hand in it? So he's been there since pretty early on. And then the other two guys, the character artist, Fervor, I actually just posted in a game development forum, and I'm like, hey, I need an artist. And I went through about 40 portfolios, and his, I paid some people to do like demo sprites, and he got it. He got the style. Yeah. And he's so awesome to work with. So he's not like a personal friend. I've never met him before. I don't even know where he lives, but he totally gets it. Like, we go back and forth. He's like on the same wavelength on everything. And then the third guy worked on Dungeon Man's doing artwork. Oh, cool. And so Jim, the developer for that, said, you talk to this guy if you need items. He's been doing all this delicious pixel art food and swords and potions, and it just looks great.
I think. Oh no, go ahead.
Oh, so one thing that's always interested me about making these bigger RPG games and talking about the items and things like that is not only coming up with the items themselves and what they do and what role they are, but RPGs, especially a game like Tangledeep, that is primarily text based and how it gets its story and information across. how daunting of a task is it to think of all the like witty one-liners or something or descriptors for all those items? Because that, aside from all of the coding and everything that you have to do, that of itself seems like a daunting task, and one that boggles my mind that it's even possible.
Oh, it's been interesting. So Jim actually has been helping with some of the writing for the game. I sort of had this concept in mind for the background of it, and why are we going into a dungeon? Who is this character? Why does everybody look like an animal? Or have animal kind of characteristics except the main character. So even though it kind of was gameplay first, and then sort of thinking of a story for it, what we wanted to try to do with how we were presenting it is rather than have a lot of cutscenes and have a lot of NPC dialogue and like go here, trigger this quest, go there, which again, that's sort of like a hallmark of JRPGs, but it doesn't necessarily work for a game that is more about exploration and finding cool random treasure in a dungeon and like interesting encounters. And the stories should be just as much about what can happen. You go into this weird area and there's a giant treasure chest and like, oh, I opened up the chest and like I got garbage out of it. Like, the stories are what happened in the game in terms of the gameplay. That's just as important. So what we wanted to try to do, and what we're still working on, so this is one of the big things that is definitely still in progress, is telling the story from the perspective of the main character, very first person. So all the item flavor text is written as if she was writing in a journal and you're reading like her journal entry for this thing.
Awesome.
Like how does it relate to her life in the game? What can we tell about the world from this particular item? Is there like a memory associated with this thing or this material? Is there something about like where it came from? So I thought that was kind of an interesting approach to it, and to keep it tight enough so that you're not reading like a Mass Effect level codex for every item, but like just a sentence or two that's well crafted. So Jim has been a big driving force in coming up with that idea and getting the text in.
Nice. That's a really cool way of going about it too. Because I figure it in most RPGs that I played, like you're right, like the Mass Effect Codex, it is always taken from somebody else wrote this down and you're just discovering it. But I do like it more from the first person. I like that touch of the first person discovering it and writing her own thoughts about it in her journal. It's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've addressed some of the bigger challenges of developing your own game. What would you say the most fun part of this whole development process has been for you?
Boy, well, I mean, in general, the fun part is just there's a certain level of challenge versus there's challenge and there's frustration. So, and there's a certain like line in between there where it's engaging, trying to solve a problem, coming up with a solution, and then seeing that solution work and do something cool in the game, and then seeing people react to that. So the process can, at this point, now that there's thousands of people playing the game, I can get people's reaction to that very fast. I can put in a new skill or something on stream, like we put in these things where originally there was just the skills you could learn were from the character classes, but then we said you can also learn skills related to different weapon types. If you prefer bow or spear, whatever, you can specialize. So I did a lot of that stuff actually live on stream, and then I got in the game like 2 days later. I released it, and that is just very satisfying. Because it's a challenge. You think, well, okay, what kind of masteries would be cool? What would people like to see? Figuring out how to do it and then doing it, and without too much difficulty. The stuff that when it gets frustrating is like you have a feature or you have a bug and you're spending like a week trying to fix it. So there's a line there. It can't be too easy. It can't be too hard. But it's very rewarding when you come up with a good solution to a problem, you release it, and people are like, wow, this is cool. I love this.
Nice.
And so you've made music for some other video games and you've done remixes of other soundtracks. Would you say that you really like the work that you've done so far for Tangledeep? Because from what I've heard, it sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Are you having fun making the OST for this game?
This is pretty much my dream project in terms of music. Like, previously my dream project was working on the Dungeon Man soundtrack because that had some of the same influences. We were going for this sort of retro sound. There is a difference between like retro and then pure chiptune, where you're just using like NES and Game Boy type sound. So it's later than that. But here, I really get to channel the games that I grew up with and that I've listened to and that are just ingrained in my mind. Like Specifically Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy 4, 5, and 6, and Lufia 2, Terra Enigma, Secret of Mana. So that pantheon of like the very best SNES RPGs, I get to use the same kind of sounds, the same kind of approach to melody and harmony, but hopefully I don't think I've done anything that's like super derivative either, where it just sounds like it's a copy of something. I want to evoke the same feeling and the same atmosphere without, it's sort of like new but familiar. That's sort of the goal, where it's like, this is really cool. It's like a new Super Nintendo soundtrack came out. So I'm just having an absolute blast with that.
Nice.
Yeah, awesome. So remind everybody, when is Tangledeep currently scheduled to launch officially?
Well, I will say this. The original plan that I said in the Kickstarter was in November or December of this year. And what I have been advised since then, as the game has come out in early access, people have been saying to me, you do not want to release in November or December. It's just going to get steamrolled by massive game releases, biggest publishers.
Stuff.
Right.
So my thinking is, and obviously, I've shared this with some people, and when I make a final decision, I'll post about it. I'll say, I think January, like early January, makes a lot more sense. And it's not really delaying the game exactly, because it's playable now on early access, and you're going to keep getting all the updates. So in a way, if version 1.0 would have been in November, and now we're calling January version 1.0, it's like if we had released in November, January would be version like 1.5. So
yeah,
it just means the final release is going to be even better, really.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I didn't really think about timing in terms of
sure.
launch and competing sales. Those are the kinds of marketing things that you might not think about unless somebody else does happen to bring it up to you.
I certainly didn't.
Which is good that somebody was there to do that, because
exactly.
Definitely from what I've played, especially, like, I'm really into the game and the story. I do like its older retro feel, but then also those newer mechanics that I just talked about before, with like the turn-based and all that, is created so far a very fun gaming experience that I really want to play more of. So everybody needs to play more of it too, because like it's great, it's fun, and I think it'll be a really fun experience for everybody.
That's the dream. I think another thing that releasing a little later will help with is localizing the game. That's pretty important to me. I would love to have it in, at a minimum, like French and German and Japanese. Those markets in particular, a lot of RPG lovers there,
Right.
And maybe more. So having that extra time would enable us to have it launch in all those languages, and maybe, cross my fingers, if we can get it on Switch also, that'd be
That'd be cool.
amazing.
That'd
be
That's a real big goal of mine.
I would like to put in my 2 cents and request that.
I will say, though, that I am very pleased that it's coming to Mac right out the gate, because most stuff doesn't come to Mac, or it takes a very long time, and I've been a Mac gamer forever.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that.
That's important to me. PC, or when I say PC, I mean like any kind of desktop or laptop computer. I really want to do PC, Mac, Linux, just right out the gate. So that was like, to me, a given. It has to be that.
Nice.
Yeah, we Mac users appreciate it.
We do, because there's
we never get the good games.
Small percentage of games that actually come to us, so we're happy when they do.
Yeah, I would definitely. I want to get it to the widest audience possible. I mean, for me, it's really. I don't want it to sound like any cliche, but it really is about making the best game possible and having the most people enjoy it. It's not really about the money. For me, I do, in a sense, have a day job. I do stuff with music. I do stuff with music software. So it's more important to me that the game just be out and enjoyed by lots of people.
Yeah. So in terms of your musical career, we're huge fans of all types of music, and especially video game soundtracks. Are there any other projects that you mentioned that your project right now is really kind of your dream come to life, but are there any long-running series or other video games that you've always really wanted to contribute to, that you were maybe hoping to be able to contribute to in the future?
Yeah, it's interesting, I guess, because I guess I said sort of like, I'm just going to make my own game. It was really cool getting to work on Soul Calibur 5. That was something where I thought that series was great, and I got to contribute to that. And I was like, okay, cross that off the list. I would love to, at some point, do music for so like anything by Square, just because, and anything new by Square, because I think that some of their newer stuff has a really interesting style. It's very different. I don't think you could listen to, Final Fantasy 13 and then listen to 6 and say like, oh, it's just more Final Fantasy music. It's like very, very different. It's because it's different composers. So I would love to, look at like any of their newer games and then apply my own style, which I think insofar as what I've been doing with sort of the Zircon name, I've really enjoyed going a little bit more in that sort of like jazzier, more atmospheric direction lately. Like the last album I did, Getaway, in 2015, had a lot of that kind of like jazz and funk mixed with electronic dance music elements. So that would be awesome to do. Definitely a Final Fantasy thing. I'm a lot less interested in sort of the big orchestral stuff. I've done that for a bunch of projects, but like I feel like I've gotten to do the big epic orchestral stuff, and I'm just not. I don't care for it as much now as maybe I used to. Like once you get through it and you see it's very difficult. Like you have to get for a game like Soul Calibur, it's like live orchestra, live choir, and you got to get all the sheet music and everything like that. And some people live and breathe that, and that's fine, and I can appreciate it. But in terms of making it, it's a lot more challenging, and you have to go through more steps to get to the final product. Whereas I love the ability to just sit down at my keyboard in my studio and like produce something right there.
Nice.
And that's a big difference, I guess.
Yeah, and I was been listening in the last few days because like Mogan said, she's been listening to your music for years, and she introduced me to your music as well.
Also, quick timeout. Getaway was amazing. There are so many good songs from Getaway. I listened to Firecracker and Level Bounce on repeat all the time. Those are two great tracks.
Awesome. Okay, I need to check those out. I don't know if I've heard those yet, but yeah. So in the last week or so, I've been listening to a lot more of your stuff, and man, it is excellent music to just have on as I do video editing as my career. And so like when I edit and stuff like that, it's the perfect accompaniment. And I've really enjoyed what I've listened to so far.
There's only so much orchestra any one person can take before
true.
they get a little bit bored.
It's definitely a trend, everybody has their opinion on this again. And I think that there's a sense, I think, especially among kind of like retro video game music fans. When I say retro, I mean like, 16-bit sort of and before, that a lot of more modern music is not as melodic, and it's a little bit more like samey maybe, because it's so much of it is orchestral for the big budget projects.
Right.
And I think that's only true if you look at a certain subset of games, but it's definitely true that in that certain subset of games, like a lot of the AAA action, adventure, RPG stuff, it's true the palette does tend to converge on that sort of thing. But then on the other hand, you have stuff like Stardew Valley and Undertale. Those are hugely successful games. And Doom, for example, I mean, that really bucked the trend.
Oh, I love the Doom soundtrack.
Yeah, I mean, like, I know the guy that wrote music for Doom, and the funny thing about that, and this is like a little bit of trivia, he actually started out as a sort of a fan remixer. You can go on Overclock Remix, and you can listen to a remix he did of Doom, like 10 years ago.
That's awesome.
That's
way
amazing.
before he was doing the actual soundtracks like Wolfenstein and Doom and things like that.
Oh, wow.
So that's just awesome. And so that guy came up with such a unique and creative thing. In fact, I would recommend to anybody, absolutely anybody, whether you're a musician or not. He did a GDC talk about behind the music of Doom, and he talks about the creative process for it. And some of it's technical, but he talks about how in order to do a sound that nobody had ever heard before, he basically had to throw out everything he used to do for his workflow and come up with something totally new. And that just really resonated with me. Like, man, I would love to do that. I would love to do a project where I get to do something a totally new style, synthesize new genres and sounds, and not just be like, we want it like epic orchestra.
Right. Man,
Jared is a huge fan of the Doom soundtrack. He loves it.
I got to go watch that talk.
Yeah, so we don't want to take up too much of your time. Would you have any final words for the viewers about Tangledeep?
I think one of the things I'd want to say is that there's so much more to come. I mean, if you're listening to this now in early August 2017, the game as it is now, I'm very happy with it. I'm very proud of it. But there's so much more that I want to do. there's one of the biggest things is that I want to increase the simulation elements of it. I think, especially after seeing sort of how well Stardew Valley has done. I mean, I love in classic RPGs, anytime you're like, oh, you get to build up a town or something, all these little like side things, like, oh, you go fishing for 2 hours. That stuff it's like heartwarming. I love it. And right now we have stuff like you can plant trees and you can capture monsters. So, I mean, I definitely want it to be like, by the time the game is out, you're like breeding monsters together. You've got monster pets. They have
I want
like
monster pets. Yes.
I want to get to that point.
So like, yeah, I mean I have so many plans for the game, and basically, if you like it now, there's so much more to come. If you don't like it now, if you feel like it needs more, then again, there's so much more to come. So that's like the main thing I want to say.
That's amazing. So if anybody doesn't currently have a beta key, are they able to play it right now through any other means? Can they still get in on that, or did you have to be kind of an early adopter?
You can pick up the game right now on Steam. It is available in early access. If you just search for Tangledeep on Steam, you'll see it. It's also on GOG.com, which is like, if you don't like Steam for whatever reason, you can pick it up on there. It's like DRM free. And those are both getting updated at an unsustainable pace. I've been updating every day.
Actually, I was really alarmed.
I don't think I can keep up with it every day. Maybe I'll go to once a week at some point. But for now, I'm just, it's exhilarating getting to see people's feedback and then just like, oh, I want to fix that. Oh, I should put that in the game. Like that's a good idea. So that's what it's been like. But yeah, you can still pick it up on Steam and GOG, and you'll get the updates regularly. Yeah,
I was amazed when I booted up the beta the other day, like on August 2nd, and it said version update August 2nd on the beta, and I was like, holy crap.
Yep. That build went out at like 1:30 a.m.
Yeah. It's like he's really putting in overtime. Well, listen, thank you so much for coming on the show. It has been a joy talking with you about this product, and we're really looking forward to it when it does eventually launch.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, before we do go, we do have to give the quick song hint for this week. It is I Matey. So there it is. I Matey is a song contest for this week. So the contest goes live Wednesday, 9 a.m., the day after this episode goes live. First person to correctly guess the song when we post on our Facebook or Twitter page or in the comments of this YouTube video will be able to send us a song and hint for a future episode. But Andrew, thank you so much for joining us for this episode. It's been great to learn about Tangledeep and your experience with building the game and composing music for games like you've done for years. So it was a really, really great and insightful conversation. So really enjoyed having you on. Thank you again for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
And so again, the game is Tangledeep. It was developed by Andrew Aversa, a.k.a. Zircon. So check out the game, check out his music. And this concludes this episode of Team Chat Podcast. Until next time, I'm one of your hosts, Jarrett Wilson, joined to my right by Rachel Mogan.
Sayonara.
And our special guest, Andrew Aversa. Thanks again, Andrew.
Thank you.
Stick around for the song. We'll see you all next time.